Hi, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate session of the day. This session is going to be unique for several reasons. The first is that the format is different. So we're going to have two lightning talks. So first of all, Max is going to start with a 10-minute lightning talk. And then Tobias and Fabian here are going to follow that with a 10-minute lightning talk. And then we're going to have a 10-minute Q&A. So if you think of questions during either or both of the lightning talks, please write them down and share them during the Q&A. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Max.
All right. Yeah, just a soundtrack. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, my name is Max. I'm CEO and co-founder of Open Energy Transition. My background is that I did a PhD in energy system planning, and research. In the research world, open source is the standard already. Like everybody uses that. But yeah, when I looked just in the industry, on the industry side, open source was not a standard at all in the energy planning world. So I had the choice basically to either create something or be unemployed, because I wanted really open source, an open source job. Now I still don't work on the code anymore. I just bring funding somehow in the space. And yeah, I just tell you a little bit from our experiences on how we grew within 2.5 years to now 50 people. We're helping the philanthropic world to better understand why free and open source software is really important. And we have on the horizon 10 to hundreds of million actually funding going into open source through our activities, and not just for our company, but through the whole ecosystem. And yeah, now I'm really happy to talk a little bit about some thoughts I drafted 2 weeks ago about this topic. Okay, grid planning. If you don't know it yet, it's actually grid planning. We do that to figure out what's the optimal grid investments which we should do, or how should we operate our grid infrastructure, our energy system. It's actually a 1 billion per year software industry behind that. At the moment, mostly proprietary. But yeah, there's already, I was just estimating the FOSS number. It's growing. We're getting there. And yeah, the big leverage effect is really with the software, we actually decide thousands of billion investments a year into real hardware infrastructure and so on. So it's really important to actually improve our planning tools to have maybe some impact, savings on this thousand billion factor. And yeah, we hope with open source software, we can be actually much better, more innovative and collaborative to actually have impact on this thousands billions here. Yeah, I just status quo is also actually quite interesting. Most things are proprietary, as I mentioned, but there's also the new digital sovereignty angle. It's getting more and more important. We don't want to depend on, let's say, Russian software to operate our grid, which that's currently not the case. But partially we depend on American-owned solutions, and here I think the dependency on such software angles is a little bit shaky since the recent months or years at least. Yeah, and digital sovereignty really helps to be independent and so on. The free and open source software is useful, but in the energy planning sector, but it can mature. There's still room to improve and work on it. And we really need to make it mainstream to get adoption on another level, both on actually the demand side. So we need more users, but we also need more supply companies, service companies, helping you to adopt the software, helping understanding what it is and so on. And yeah, for that, we need some kind of revolution or evolution within the FOSS sector for energy or grid planning. Here you see a graph talking about adoption on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, like the different type of users. I would say currently we are this red dot here, where we have mostly early adopters working with us and others in the ecosystem to use FOSS software in action. Some examples, like we personally work with the European Energy Regulator, with various grid operators across Europe and other parts in the world. And then also many industry users are also depending on free and open source software. But we are not yet mainstream. Like we have a couple of magnitudes more potential users out there, and like this is where we need to get. And one theory is, okay, once we have this large dependency on FOSS software, then we can also have this large money to finance developers to make things self-sufficient, like the Linux space. Good. So yeah, as I mentioned, we need money in general, money to fund people mostly, and yeah, here the funding sources, I splitted them a little bit here. We have like generally industry funding that comes through adoption often. We have public funding and philanthropic support, and then also the research adoption and funding that comes from there. So the question is, okay, how can we get more private and public and philanthropic funding to catalyze this revolution? That's the question that we are really puzzling all the time. Like that's an answer that we try to figure out every day. And like I hope to get some inspiration on what are our thoughts and thoughts about that, and maybe you have also some ideas on how we can improve that. So point one is that from our experience, I think it was really important to spot the opportunity and know how to get FOSS software adopted. Spotting the opportunity, like I said, okay, there was already a proprietary software owning our old school grid planning industry, and people are paying a shit ton of money for that. So we're like, ding, 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 like it's a big opportunity to get FOSS in there. And yeah, but beyond that, we're like more, let's say, money-friendly aspects that FOSS can provide. There are actually a lot of other things that benefit the industry, like accessibility, the collaboration nature that is much easier with free and open source software, and then also the innovation aspect. And like with the changing energy infrastructure, we really need much more and faster innovation. So that was important to realize. And then, yeah, how can we get FOSS more adopted? So what we currently facing is like a industry which doesn't like software so much, and like they're generally very risk averse, which is good. Like we need electricity 24/7 all the time, so of course they're risk averse. But most of those grid planners, they never heard of open source software. Like some of them, like we enter rooms and they don't know what's FOSS software, though they're paying like $1 billion for proprietary software. So just like testing the market awareness and creating increasing confidence and so on, it's very, very important for our old school industry. And yeah, for that, and like the last point is a little bit unclear, but like we also need to focus on growing the FOSS ecosystem. So I'm not talking about a single project that we need to blow up with money, but we need really to fund the ecosystem, raise the awareness around the ecosystem, and there's like few initiatives that really help here. What also, like what we realized is that there's a lot of noise within the funding world. And noise, like we have a lot of projects. There are so many open source projects around, but we need to actually figure out, okay, where should we prioritize? And what's key is to measure ecosystem growth, high impact users, and benchmark the technical capability. This is what we did just recently with a benchmark platform that we developed, where we compared 200 different open source grid planning tools. And that really helped us to prioritize on, hey, how should we invest in this ecosystem? And last but not least, yeah, almost, okay, I have another slide after this. Like, we need to actually work really, really hard on the success signals. And that also means, like, training competitors, helping adoption for high impacts cases. Like, we need more early adopters, and until often a problem. And yeah, if you have any ideas around that, please reach out, and I'm done. Thank you.
Did you put it? So, do you hear me? Perfect. When we continue with part 2, Fabian and myself, Tobias, we are from SAP and want to share a bit about the perspective from how can open source funding work for an established software company, what are some of the challenges, and maybe inspire as well other companies to do something similar. So just to set the stage, who is SAP? Probably some of you have heard about us. It's one of the largest provider of enterprise software, one of the largest software companies in Europe, and already 50 years old. And with quite a bunch of developers, so we have around 40,000 developers worldwide, and also a lot of different solutions and products we commercially sell. And what's in common for a lot of these solutions is they use a lot of different open source components under the hood, be it for development, be it for actually running these, be it for infrastructure management. And these things are quite important and also very relevant for us that these are well maintained and in a great state. But how can you engage as a software company with open source projects? Probably quite obvious. The easiest way is, hey, you provide development contributions. You have developers which can provide them. And one thing we heard in earlier talks as well is open source projects are quite diverse. They are either driven from individual developers in their spare time or just as a side project. They are well-established projects and foundations. There are open source projects driven by commercial entities, and all of these have slightly different governance structures, slightly different engagement models, and development contributions are working quite seamless for all of these, so that's nice. But when we look at how can we financially support these projects, it gets a bit more tricky. For foundation projects, for example, memberships is a common way to engage with them. You can become a member of the Linux Foundation or of the Eclipse Foundation, and with your membership fees as well support the work of the foundation. For company projects, a very common approach we have seen is that they offer either support or some even like special enterprise editions of their open source project, and they have a nice legal department and purchasing department with whom you can interact and do contracts and then do stuff. The big question we had is, well, this covers some of our use cases and are also quite established already. But last year, or to be precise, even before that, but last year we started to focus on what about the last category? Independent projects, which are quite small, where maybe one developer or two developers are doing that in their spare time. We can help them or we can engage with development contributions, and that's nice. But sometimes what really helps a project is that we just say, hey, maintainer, you're doing a great job and we appreciate your expert knowledge, and it's probably not worth that we skill up somebody internally to get the same level, but it's rather easier to say, we give you some money to keep on doing what you are doing best. But the big question was then internally, hey, how can we as a company give money to such independent maintainers and projects? And that's when what we sought out to try to figure out. So how do you give money to individuals as a company? And that sounds rather easy, but it actually starts getting quite complicated, because a normal scenario would be, okay, we have a contracting department and say, hey, here's our standard supplier contract. It's just a couple 100 pages. Give it to your legal department. They can review it and then be done it. But that probably doesn't work for a single maintainer. So what we ended up doing is we found an intermediary. We looked both at GitHub Sponsors as a platform or Open Collective, which can handle all these legal annoyances for the projects itself, but as well for us to ensure that we have a single counterparty in that sense. We ended up using GitHub Sponsors because the advantage is that GitHub Sponsors can as well route money to Open Collectives. So you kind of get both, but only have one platform. And it's another thing we then just had to ensure is that, hey, we don't give money to people who are employed by SAP, because kicking that off is just having a small pilot project with like 1 or 2 projects where we could experience the whole process and get started with it. But now we have a process on how we can give money to maintainers and projects, but how do we actually select projects and maintainers? And for that, I'm handing over to Fabian.
Yeah, so we noticed 2 main challenges in this regard. First of all, there are thousands of possible open source components that SAP uses in their products, and which of those products or projects do we want to give our money to? And the other challenge is, in the future, you might have different funding goals to the funding goals you have at the moment. For one funding round, we might prioritize improving our supply chain security, while on the next funding round, you may just have the goal of giving back to the open source software community. And that results in completely different lists of perfect fitting open source projects for this funding round. So what we ended up doing is we chose an approach that based on 2 different methods. First of all, an internal voting, where the idea was that developers at SAP can nominate a project to get funding, and as long as another team says, okay, we use this product as well and we find it good as well, they get entered into this internal voting, where every developer SAP has who has a verified open source contribution to any project outside of SAP can cast a vote and say, okay, hey, this project is really cool, I support that you give money to it. And that our expectation was that this would have a high probability of identifying crucial projects to some products, and also identifying projects that are really well known and yeah, maybe passion projects of some people. So what came out of this is, for example, OSS is one of the projects that we are funding with this, and yeah, it's very well known, and so this fits our idea. The disadvantage is, maybe you're probably, if you're going to do a voting, which is based on my majority, you're going to get very well-known projects, so not the less known project that only 1 or 2 teams use, but is very important to them. But we kind of found an exception to this rule, because Mold was also submitted by this person in the front row here. It's a lot less known project than I would say than OSS is. Yeah. But the second approach we chose was more, we wanted to give every project a chance, and we wanted to do this data-driven way, where we can see actually why this would be a good candidate for open source funding. So the way we chose this is advantage is here that we don't necessarily have an inherent bias towards well-known projects. For example, one of the projects that got funding because of this is Zebra Crossing, which is a barcode processing library, which is used in surprisingly many open products for SAP, and is probably something that nobody would have submitted as a funding candidate. But yeah, it's really nice that these projects also get a chance. And it really is not a perfect science. There is some manual filtering that's needed. So you have to check the same things as you do have to check when the funding. You have to check there's no SAP employees somewhere in there. And there's no, all the things that Tobias mentioned earlier. Just the metrics are based on our internal usage, the project activity, security score. We use the OpenSSF security scorecard, and I also try to add the truck and bus factor to see how many maintainers a project might depend on. Yeah, so this is it from our presentation. I hope you have a few questions for our Q&A now. Yeah.
Question.
For the first speech, regarding the energy data, okay. So you mentioned the comparison between proprietary software and software, and free software for market communication and I guess all the framework. But what I missed was the value proposition. So what is the value of if you go to a company and you bring that message, what is the killer argument that you will use? Why free software is better than proprietary software, right? So in a slide you had innovation, the time of value, and of course is faster, we know that. And of course I can add costs, because obviously that's free and the other is proprietary. But have you identified, or are you willing to identify, imagine you are in front of a big guy of one of the big energy companies, and you want to convince him or her to go for a free software. So which argument will you use, compared to companies who have spent billions in standardized with a particular, especially so complex energy market that has passed through the last 10 years of standardizations and both on the messages as well as the framework. Thanks.
Okay, so the question was, what other arguments besides costs and fast innovation are there? Okay, yeah. I mean, there's you don't depend on a single vendor. There's actually grid planning. I'm not sure if you know that, but 70% of that market is owned by one company, and they got recently bought by a private equity firm, and if you know how private equity works, pump and dump kind of schemas are there sometimes. So then weird business behaviors happening. Hey, I'm sorry, you depend on the software now. It took you 1-2 years to integrate it. Unfortunately, I have to cancel your contract. I'm the vendor. Unfortunately, I have to cancel your contract. But you're lucky. I can sell it for you for twice the price. And that kind of behavior, we see that sometimes happening because it's heavily, you're really bound to one software vendor, and people don't like this kind of business practices that we see here and there. So the independence, freedom to work with whoever is one important argument. Customization, I can customize for my needs as I want, very important. And often is also the collaboration aspect key. If we work with the European Energy Regulator, they develop a solution with us. But now suddenly all the member states, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can just take the stuff, adjust it a little bit, for their own needs and supply the European regulator with the right information. So this kind of more like smoother collaboration is also one of the key arguments. Maybe I missed something, but and like whoever you talk with, like the story is a little bit different for sure.
Thank you. Also, another question for Max. You mentioned something about providing training, including to competitors. When you're dealing with large enterprises and proprietary software, transitioning staff who are used to working with that to something new, that's part of what you provide as a service, I guess? Question part. And second part is, if they have issues afterwards, like they start running this and then something breaks in the middle of the night, do they call you? And that's part of what they pay you for?
Yeah, I mean, like they are the service companies, right? And like you can make service contracts to make sure that you offer 24/7 support, which is needed in their cases. What I mean with training the competitors is that we need more people that are able to provide 24/7 support, being capable to develop on top, and we don't want to own this one single open source ecosystem.
Right. But understood. But as part of that transition, are you helping them move like any kind of data that they have in the old legacy system over so they can transition?
That's always needed. Like transitioning, they are really locked in a heavy way sometimes to single software options. Here we can work a little bit on interoperability, and they need a service and support to actually transition as well. And as I mentioned, we shouldn't be the only company doing that. Like we are catalyzing that now. We hope that a lot of other vendors are coming in and supporting here. But you don't, as a vendor, you don't enter a support market if there's no real market there. It needs to be big enough to be interesting for a lot of people. And that's what we're catalyzing. Like we starting this kind of revolutionary moment.
Hi, question for SAP. I'm building an open source task management, product management tool, and let's pretend that you want to have that. What would I need to offer you in terms of supporting contract, legal stuff, I don't know, so that you would buy it? Like from what you explained earlier, I got that you mostly fund like libraries, and it's mostly like spray and pray, and most and more smaller things that don't have like a product that you can take to procurement and just buy it.
Yeah. So what we with our funding focused on are exactly these more components, libraries, which don't have a product. Because if you have a product and a company, the nice thing from an enterprise perspective is that we actually have somebody from whom we can procure that, do contracts with, and do these things with. So that's feasible for, let's say, something where you have something like in HashiCorp Vault or in Grafana or something like that, who have a product and a sales department. But if you have just a component which you maintain in your spare time, like every couple of days, you probably don't want the hassle of like scaling that up. But we really want to say, hey, cool stuff, and we really like that. And yeah, so that's a bit special case. If you want to scale it, you probably need to have like a sales department and the contracting stuff. Yeah. Thanks. And I think time is up, or do we have for one more question?
One more.
Okay.
Hi, I was wondering, or I have two questions, but I'll ask the first one. Who and how did you convince, I guess, SAP to give money? And maybe it's something we can do at our respective employers.
Yeah. So, I mean, the intrinsic motivation was there from the beginning, and most people can follow the understanding, hey, this is infrastructure we are using, and we probably have to pay something for that. The question is how much? and somebody needs to provide the budget for that. We were quite lucky to get it kickstarted, but we found somebody with a budget who said, well, this sounds cool, try that out, here you have some budget. And that's also what I can recommend, what was really helpful. Don't aim for like 50 or 100 projects from the get-go, but target like 1, 2, 3, and then it's as well an, let's say, a manageable amount where you potentially get an easier buy-in that somebody says, well, this is worth trying out, and if it doesn't work out, it's not the bankrupt at the end of the day. And yeah.
Okay. Do I have time for one more? Oh.
No, I don't think so. So thank you from us three, and enjoy the rest of the show.